Hello there, people of the internet. I'm out here with my Mosin Nagant. This is one of several I own. This is my M44, chambered in 7.62x54 rimmed. I have made plenty of videos talking about these rifles and the things that I like about them. I've brought them to the range plenty of times. I have made tons and tons of Mosin Nagant videos on my channel if you want to go check those out. But one thing I don't really do, since I hype these rifles up so much, along with other various military surplus firearms, one thing I don't really do is I don't really talk about the negative sides of certain military surplus firearms. So I figure I'll go ahead and I will do that. These are a couple of things that I don't like about the Mosin Nagant rifle, and I'm probably going to include other rifles in this series because, like I said, I hype these things up a lot because I really like them. But just because I like them, that does not mean that they do not have their drawbacks. So, first things first, the Mosin Nagant rifle. We're going to be talking about the base model Mosin Nagant. If you want to go and sporterize yours and turn it into something that is not a Mosin, then it becomes a custom rifle and it's no longer a Mosin Nagant. Alright, so first off, big downside of the Mosin Nagant, bolt action rifle, holds 5 shots of ammunition. It's just definitely yesterday's fighting rifle. It's yesterday's technology. In a day of self-loading, intermediate cartridge firing rifles, something like a 5-shot bolt-action rifle with an internal magazine that you have to load via stripper clip is just, it's technology that cannot stack up to what we have nowadays. So if you were going to be using something like this in a practical sense, you would definitely need the right sort of situations and the right sort of setup to be able to be effective against people who are armed with modern day stuff. You would need to be, essentially you would need to be able to take pot shots at a distance without them being able to effectively return fire upon you, which would be very difficult to do. But I guess in theory it is possible because it has been done before. So manually operated, limited capacity, difficult to reload. Those are a couple of things that I don't like about the Mosin Nagant. Now, another thing I don't like about it is there's no good way to mount optics to this rifle. Now, granted, whenever this was being designed, optics weren't, like, optics for every single rifle just was not a thing. They had optics for, like, snipers, and they had very rudimentary, like, thermal and whatnot. But for the most part, most of your rifles were just iron sight rifles, and that's the way that it was. So nowadays, with, us being able to mount an optic onto any rifle that we want, not having that capability on your rifle without significant aftermarket modifications is just not ideal. So that's kind of a modern day complaint, definitely not a complaint for the Mosin whenever it was developed. I think this design came out in 1891, so optics were definitely not all that common back then. It was definitely just an iron sight sort of setup. And speaking of iron sight sort of setup, the sights on the Mosin are actually zeroed to point of impact while there's a bayonet attached to the rifle. In this particular case, the bayonet is right here on the rifle, but for basically all of your Mosins that are Russian made, the bayonet has to be attached to the rifle in order for you to actually make your hits on target, and I think that is the absolute stupidest thing ever. I understand why they did it during the time period. Bayonets combat was definitely one of those things that militaries were assuming was going to be much more predominant than it actually was. However, in practice, it, especially like during the Second World War, where like the 9130 really saw its heyday, it was definitely a lot less common. Bayonet combat was a lot less common than what the military brass thought it was going to be. However, they still zeroed their rifles with the bayonets attached because I guess they wanted soldiers to shoot their rifles with bayonets attached. The Mosin Nagant is already a stupidly long and cumbersome rifle, and you throw a bayonet on that thing, and my god, then it becomes quite the nightmare. I definitely like the Carbine version most, but yeah. Okay, so you need a bayonet to be able to accurately shoot your Mosin, which is the stupidest thing ever. That's another thing I really dislike about the Mosin. Another thing I dislike about the Mosin, this one's going to get me some hate, but, well, I really like the 7.62x54 rim, but I also really see its drawbacks. I see it as more of a novelty round than anything else, despite the fact that it is still in very common, widespread military service all around the world, but that comes from less of it being an effective cartridge and more of it being all over the place. More of it being overwhelmingly common, and the countries that are still using it just have a ton of surplus of ammo and guns that are chambered in that ammunition. It's a rimmed cartridge, and for the time period where this was developed, head spacing on the rim of a cartridge was easier than head spacing on the neck of a cartridge, so that's one of the reasons why Russia chose to go with the rim of a cartridge, or the rimmed cartridges. So it's a rimmed cartridge. That definitely does cause issues in a lot of different systems. The Russians have developed systems to kind of get around that, but it adds a lot of complexity whenever it comes to the firearms. Even this 5-shot bolt-action rifle here has to have a separate round cutoff system to stop rim lock from happening, and even then rim lock still happens in the Mosin, so the round cutoff system that is built into the magazine still allows for rim lock to happen, and it's very predominant and very noticeable when feeding from stripper clips. And that's another thing I don't like about rimmed cartridges. Whenever you feed from stripper clips, it absolutely sucks. A lot of people are going to tell me, well, just go out and get yourself some original stripper clips because the feeding from them is okay. Well, the original stripper clips are pushing, 80 to 100 years old plus? So, yeah, they're definitely becoming less common. They're becoming more expensive. It's just one of those things that if you can find it, great. But if you can't find it, or you don't want to pay, a stupid amount of money for it, then all you're left with is modern manufactured Chinese stamp sheet metal stripper clips. And that is just what we have. So the cartridge definitely could use some updating, in my personal opinion. But again, this is yesterday's technology that we're talking about here in a modern day context. Whenever it had come out, it was absolutely adequate. Alright, so we covered the fact it's a manual bolt action. We covered the fact that it's got capacity limitations. We covered the fact that you can't really mount optics or really anything to this rifle without significant modification. We covered the fact that the sights are zeroed with a bayonet, and we covered the fact that it takes rimmed cartridges. So those are, I guess, 5 things? Yeah, that's 5 things. We'll save that to a list of 5 things that I dislike about the Mosin Nagant rifle. That being said, I really like the Mosin Nagant rifle. Even though it does have its drawbacks, it is definitely one of my all-time favorite firearms to shoot. I really like the Carbine version, but the big problem with that is it takes a full power 7.62x54 rim. That's a full power rifle cartridge. You go cutting down the barrel on a full power rifle and you get some serious muzzle blast that comes out of the end of this thing, which I have shown on the channel plenty of times. I'm sure if you wanted to go find videos on it, you could go find videos on it. So, huge concussive blast. I can feel the teeth moving around in my skull every single time I pull the trigger on this thing. And I definitely would not want to be among a volley of men that are shooting these things without ear protection. So that's kind of my stance on the Mosin Nagant rifle. Great rifle, but definitely not a perfect rifle. I don't think any of the rifles that are military surplus rifles could be classified as a perfect rifle. They all have their pros, they all have their cons, and we'll probably get into those in future videos. So I'm going to go ahead and do the outro here. Thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you guys on the next episode. Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garrett.
shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.